Hello guys, Charles here and welcome back to my channel. One of my most disliked videos on this channel is a video where I promised to reveal the secret to developing extreme speed on the instrument. And people were of course disappointed to find that the secret is consistent effort over time. I also discussed in that video how I don't believe that a metronome is the best way to develop speed. If you do want to check that video out, have a little look up here. I talk about all of that in a bit more detail. Now, I also expressed that some players with far better technique than myself rely on the metronome as a speed building tool. But like I said, I concluded that for me, it wasn't the best approach. All of this harks back to my own experiences with using a metronome. From the age of 12 or whatever I was, something like that, I think, when I started playing, I read people saying, you know, you've got to use a metronome, develop your speed, repeat, and gradually build up the tempo. And I went through phases, as most of us probably have, where I'd managed to stick to a metronome routine for kind of a week or two, and then it would eventually fizzle out and the metronome would go back on the shelf. And so I would either be using a metronome when I was very disciplined to build speed, or I wouldn't be using a metronome at all. Now, what I've realised more recently in the last few years, I've realised that the issue is that the metronome isn't for building speed, but it is for something else very, very important. So you should always be practicing with a metronome. So the job of a metronome is a groove training device. So groove is how you choose to interpret the subdivisions of any given tempo. Groove happens in an ensemble when every member of the ensemble takes personal responsibility for the tempo, the subdivisions, and the groove. What most of us do in an ensemble is let the drummer take care of that. In a really high level ensemble, every member of the ensemble is taking responsibility for the groove, and that's what gets the whole band really locking together and really cooking. So the metronome is a device to develop that. Now, just before I show you how I think you should use a metronome properly, some of the common problems and arguments against using a metronome is that it's too robotic, it's too metronomic. And of course that is correct. In a real life scenario, you can play with real musicians or you can play along to recordings, and those are probably better than playing with a metronome in some ways, but there's certain benefits to using a metronome. What we're aiming to do when we use a metronome, I think I referenced Pat Metheny saying this in a recent video, is we want to get to the point where the metronome eventually kind of just disappears because we're playing so perfectly in time with it that it vanishes. So the goal of playing perfectly to a reference, it doesn't matter whether that reference is metronomic or slightly more human if you are playing with a real life drummer. What we're training is the ability to really lock into something and to really match it. So it's useful when we're practicing to a metronome that it is perfectly predictable. But of course, when we play with a real human, due to human error and the fact that compositions compel us to slightly change the tempo here and there, we want to work on locking into whatever that tempo is, even if it does gradually change over time. So in summary, if you take nothing else from this video, please rethink what a metronome is. It's not a speed training device first and foremost, although it can be used for that. It is a groove training device, and it's a device that we want to use to teach ourselves better how to get inside the time-based aspects of music. So I don't own a real metronome, but I use my phone. But nowadays I play pretty much all the time when I'm practicing at home. I have the metronome on. I drive my partner Carmen absolutely crazy because it's always clicking in various different ways with various different sounds. But I've never got along with drum machines or drum samples. It just doesn't really do it for me. I quite like the digital metronome sound. It's fine for me. For all three of these different approaches, what we're trying to do, like I said in the intro here, is to get inside the tempo. But we're trying to get this robotic device to feel like it's grooving. If you can get that out of your metronome, this robotic, repetitive clicking, if you can get that to feel good and sound cool, then you're onto something. You're really developing your time. So the first and most simple way that we can use a metronome is to simply use it as a timekeeping device. So I've set my metronome to 4/4, and it's just going to give me a constant click. And all I'm going to focus on is keeping time. I was simply trying to keep time there. Now, if I had kept that going for a few minutes usually, I'd get to the point where that would feel very comfortable. The metronome's not really doing anything for me there. It's just kind of giving me this almost patronising, this is the 4 beats available to us, and it's telling me exactly where they land. You'll notice when I was playing, I was also doing some subdivision stuff. I started by just playing crotchets, and then I was exploring what a quaver feels like, and then a triplet quaver. And those subdivisions are important to explore. Now, the issue with playing 4/4 with 4 clicks in a bar is there's not really any challenge for you. If you are someone who has terrible time, and there are people with terrible time that manage to develop it, then that's probably a good place to start for you. If you're the sort of person who struggles to clap in time to a song, then just the challenge of having 4 beats in a bar and trying to mask all 4 of them with a perfect percussive clap or percussive playing would be a great challenge. But for most of us, after a couple of minutes of that, you kind of get into the swing of it and lock in. So this next approach is to use a less is more approach. By creating more space between the beats, it gives us more room for error, increasing the challenge on us. We've got to make sure that we land on every beat as accurately as possible, but that we also place the subdivisions as accurately as possible between them. And we've got fewer references here, so it adds to the challenge. So I'm simply going to half the tempo. So I'm going to go from 100 BPM, which was the first exercise I was playing, to 50 BPM. Now I wanted to rush a little bit there, so again I would sit with that for some time and it would just keep me going on those beats. Now because I've halved the time from 100 BPM to 50 BPM, I'm still feeling 100 BPM in my head. I'm still thinking of this as 4/4, but I'm only getting a click now on beat 1 and 3. However, it's also quite nice to interpret those 2 beats as beats 2 and 4, because that's kind of more like what a snare would be playing in a 4/4 beat. They'd be giving us a solid beat 2 and 4. So I'm going to keep that same thing, but I'm going to count myself in now, and you're going to hear how I'm counting 2 and 4 when the click happens. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now I started to feel like I was actually starting to swing a little bit there. I was starting to get into it. And all I've got is half time of what I started with. But I'm starting to feel some sense of groove from this robotic metronomic device. Now, we can take this even further and just have 1 click per bar, and you can choose which beat that click's going to be on. I quite like the click being on beat 4, so I'll half it again, so we'll be now at 25 BPM. And this is going to be really hard, this is really too hard for me. But if I treat this click as beat 4, I'm going to then try and subdivide the rest of the beat, and it's up to me to really place beats 1, 2 and 3. 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. As you can see, I'm actually just playing random A major stuff here. I don't know why I've settled on that today. But the point here is that I'm focusing on my time. The notes I'm playing are less important. That's really hard, actually, but I was quite pleased with that. I started to actually, again, feel some sense of groove from that. Now we can spread that out even further. We can have 1 click per 2 bars or 1 click per 4 bars. Good luck with those. They're really, really hard. But you see, I'm now training my sense of feel, not worrying about a top speed. Anything you work on, ask yourself, what's the musical implication of this? So if it's a technical thing or a chord thing or a theory thing or a rhythm thing, whatever it is, ask yourself what's the musical implication of this. So by working on this, rather than thinking, oh, I can play that exercise at 122 BPM instead of 120 BPM, aren't I getting fast? Well, that's great, but you'd have to have a specific musical application for that, and perhaps you do. That's not me knocking speed training. I've done plenty of it myself. But we need to make sure that in this instance, I'm thinking, yeah, that's really going to help me when I play with other people or just play by myself to have a more solid sense of time. And we discussed in the 80-20 video recently, which you can see up here, how that's the most important thing in music. So we discussed that that's a less is more approach, that we're stripping beats away and making life harder for ourselves to challenge our internal clock. So this is the more is more approach. This is closer to playing with a drum machine or a real drummer, where they don't do less, they're filling in details between the beats. They're also playing the subdivisions. The app has 4 sounds available. I can play 3 different types of click at different pitches, and I can play silence on a beat, okay? So by using those combinations, I create a rhythm that I feel has a real sense of groove to it. Sticking to 100 BPM, here's my current rhythm. Now I'll put that up on the screen in terms of its notation. This is starting on a silence. I'm going to try and count along with it here. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can hear I've got loud 4 and a weak 1. Now additionally, this groove adds the 3rd triplet of each beat into the groove. So I've always got that basic element of swing going on there with the triplets running by as we go. So I'm just going to play along to this, and the goal with the more is more approach is to really lock in. This is when we want to make the metronome vanish. Really hard to do, but that's our lifelong objective, not just this practice session. We're trying to get this real groove internalized metronomically so that when we play with real musicians, we're able to repeat the process, listen to exactly what they're doing and lock into it as perfectly as possible. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So there I was really trying to lock into exactly what the metronome was giving me. What I haven't demonstrated very well today though is that you do still need to include space in your playing. It's very easy to do what I just did there, where you're really focusing on exactly where they go, that you end up just playing fixed triplets and you're trying to make everything line up. I can still have space in my playing, and I should still have space in my playing, because time and space our groove. That's how it all works. You've got to play things as perfectly in time as possible and then leave a little bit of breathing room before you begin your next musical sentence. And again, I wasn't demonstrating that very well there because I was obsessing, because the camera's on me, about trying to get it as perfect as possible. So those are the 3 ways I think you should be using a metronome. 1 click per beat, which is probably best for people who think that they've still got work to do on their basic timekeeping. A less is more approach, where you want to start by just having 2 beats in a 4/4 bar, and then maybe just 1 beat in a 4/4 bar, and then maybe 1 beat per 2 4/4 bars, and so on and so forth. And of course you can apply that to different time signatures as well. And then the 3rd approach, which is where you want to have a more is more approach, and you're really trying to dial every single tiny detail in as perfectly as possible with your metronome, really trying to lock it in so that the metronome vanishes into the background because you're playing so perfectly on top of it that the 2 phase one another out. So I'm practicing with the metronome pretty much all the time nowadays, but I've rethought what it is. I've reframed what a metronome is for. It's a groove practicing device. It's not a timekeeping or a speed training device, although it can be used for both of those. Let me know how you like to use a metronome down below in the comments. Maybe figure out a way to write out some of the beats you practice to, in whichever way you can figure out to do that, that you think have a good sense of pulse and swing to them that people might benefit from practicing along to. Also, let me know any other videos you'd like me to cover on this channel. I'm always open for suggestions and I look forward to reading those. If you did find this video useful, please do give it a like, subscribe, ding that notification bell, and share with any of your friends who might also benefit from this information. And as always, I hope you're all doing very well, getting plenty of practice in, and I very much look forward to seeing you in the next one. Cheers.
Roll up, let me embed a story you'll never forget. A drip, drip, but drowning in debt now. You can't buy your way out, and I heard you find it difficult to cope. Well, here by this bottle full of